Strike throw pressure is the core of Street Fighter offense. Most players will assume you already know what it means. With Street Fighter 6 having parry and throw loops, strike throw pressure is perhaps even more important than it was in older games. In this video, I'll explain what strike throw pressure is, how to use it effectively, and how to defend against it. Strike throw pressure is a mix-up where you make your opponent guess between a strike or a throw. If the opponent blocks, they're vulnerable to a throw, but if they tech, they're vulnerable to the strike. In practice, there are options to cover both, such as reversals or delay tech. If you don't know what delay teching is, I have a video on that linked in the description. There's actually a third offensive option, the shimmy. This is where you walk backwards instead of doing any pressure. If your opponent does a reversal, you'll block it. If they delay tech, it will whiff and you can get a punish. However, shimmying opens you up to your opponent taking their own turn. The attacker performing strike throw pressure has three options: strike, throw, or shimmy. The defender has many options which I'll get into later. The key thing to note is that all the defender's options are either high risk or unrewarding. If the defender guesses wrong, they'll take a lot of damage. Strike throw mix-ups are low risk for the attacker, which makes them a powerful option. So when can you use a strike throw mix-up? The most obvious time is when you're at advantage and in throw range of your opponent. For more information on what being at advantage means, check out my video on frame data. Plus on block moves that leave you close enough for a throw are rare in Street Fighter 6. Some characters have them, but your character may not. However, after a drive rush, you're usually plus enough to do a strike throw mix-up. You can also perform one when the opponent is knocked down, assuming they're close enough. This is most common in the corner, especially after a throw. Most characters in the game have throw loops in the corner. This means they can get back into throw range after a throw. Throw loops are an example of a strike throw mix-up. In this case it loops, meaning you can repeatedly force your opponent to guess until they guess right. You can also attempt a strike throw mix-up at any time when you think your opponent isn't going to challenge you. For example, if you're parrying a lot and you've conditioned your opponent to bait it, you can exploit this and go for a strike throw mix instead. This kind of conditioning based play is more advanced, and I wouldn't worry about it at lower levels. Lower level players often can't be conditioned because they're not adapting to their opponents. I want to give some tips on how to use a strike throw mix-up effectively. The first time you do one, it's going to be a guess as you have no information. Always pay attention to what your opponent does in response to your mix-up. Do they favour one option over others? Is there a pattern? When you have no information, I'd avoid shimmying. Since shimmying loses to your opponent trying to take their turn, you need to ensure that your opponent is respecting your options before you go for it. When trying to guess what your opponent will do, you should consider the context of the match. If you're on low health, they may be more likely to try to close out the round with a reversal. If they have no super meter and less than 2 bars of drive, a reversal would put them in burnout, which is good for you. There's layers to this. At higher levels, players will be less likely to reversal at obvious times. There's a mind game happening behind the mix-ups. Finally, with any read or guessing based aspect of the game, there's a level of psychology. If your opponent seems impatient or tilted, they may be more likely to do a reversal. Try not to get too in your own head trying to guess what the opponent will do. As an attacker, all of your options are fairly safe, and it's on the defender to make the reads. Now let's talk about the defender side. You have many options, but none of them cover everything. They will all lose if you guess wrong. I'll now list some of your options as a defender. Do nothing and just block, also referred to as taking the throw. This is often considered the safest option. If the opponent presses a button or shimmies you, you're out of the mix-up. Keep in mind that most characters have throw loops in the corner. This means that if your opponent throws you, you're back in the same situation. Still, it's very common to see high-level players take multiple throws in a row. This is because throws do far less damage than combos. Tech the throw. If you tech the throw, you'll get sent back to neutral. You can delay tech to tech the throw while still blocking the strike. This can be a good option if your opponent isn't representing the shimmy. Just keep in mind that if you do get shimmied, you'll eat a huge combo. I've covered this option in detail in another video, so I won't go into it too deeply here. Parry. If you perfect parry, you get a punish and you can set up your own pressure. This is great in the corner as you can back throw your opponent, completely reversing the situation. Perfect parry is great against strikes, but if your opponent shimmies or throws, you'll eat a punish counter. Punish counter throws do extra damage and give a hard knockdown. Because of this, parry is a high risk, high reward option. Invincible reversals. An invincible reversal beats both throws and strikes, but loses hard to a shimmy. At the cost of resources, you'll get some damage and a reset to neutral. This is a high risk option and the reward isn't usually too good, so use it sparingly. I'm not saying never do it, but don't blindly autopilot reversals. Some characters like JP get more reward from a reversal and can even side switch. This makes it a better option. Pressing a low button. Pressing a low will hit your opponent walking back if they shimmy. It will lose to strike or throw. How good an option it is depends on the reward your character gets from a low. If your character has a crouching medium kick drive rush, this can be a rewarding option to call out a shimmy. It's great if you have a read. Mashing a 4-frame. Mashing can be a good option to keep your opponent honest. If you mash, you can counter hit your opponent trying to do a slow move. For example, if your opponent is only +1 but they're pressing a medium, it will lose to your mash. You generally need to know your opponent's frame data to know whether or not mashing is a good idea. If your opponent isn't trying to sneak in a slow move, mashing will lose to both strike and throw. As a defender, you're really trying to guess what the opponent will do and choose an option to beat that. You have some safe options and some riskier but more rewarding ones. If you're unsure of what the opponent will do, blocking is a safe option. Blocking beats everything other than a throw, and a throw does far less damage than the strike or shimmy would. That said, you need to mix up your options. If the opponent realizes you never tech, they can exploit that. Ultimately, you're going to have to make some reads. A big part of what makes strike throw pressure so powerful is that it's favoured for the attacker. There's no easy answer, but you can try to avoid getting into the situation in the first place. Street Fighter 6 does allow your opponent to force a mix-up with drive rush, but at least it's expensive. You're always going to get put into a mix-up at some point. Even pro players regularly take many throws in a row, it's just part of the game. Strike throw pressure is at the core of Street Fighter. It's the most common mix-up in the game. Try to think consciously about your options both as an attacker and defender, and eventually you'll get better at making the correct guesses. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.